Religion in Africa is a way of life for many. Humans have long had some kind of belief system. For thousands of years, Africans followed their traditional religions. In time, many abandoned these in favour of new ones. In this programme, we examine the indigenous religions of Africa and how these practices have endured. We look at Judaism and early Christianity. What was their influence on the continent and what impact did Africans have on these religions? There are many indigenous religions across Africa today, like Vodun, Orisha and Nkiche. They vary in practice from region to region, but share common features such as the idea in some higher and pervasive entity and force, which is manifested in everything that has been created now and in the future. The idea that ancestors exist in another world and can be invoked to intervene in our affairs. And prayers and sacrifices are made to intercessors so that a person's life on earth can be good and he or she can become an ancestor after death. Today, of Africa's 1 billion population, about 15% follow traditional religions. The rest are mostly Muslims and Christians. To find out more, I travel off the beaten track in southwestern Zimbabwe to meet a remote community in the Matobo Hills in Matabeleland with Zimbabwean culture expert Patisa Nyati. Patisa explains to me that these people are being trained in traditional spiritual practices.
This is spiritual elevation. They are under training. There are two things that are very important. Ululation, it's a show of reverence. And then secondly, they were mentioning the name of the ancestor. That's very important. So through ululating and also clapping hands. When you clap hands, you are showing reverence.
And it summons the spirit.
That's right, that's right. That's the whole purpose. What we are witnessing here is spirituality. It wasn't religion. It's not proper to call it religion. It's spirituality for us. But that spirituality is what ensured fertility of the soil and sustenance of the human race.
So just list for us then what those fundamental beliefs were, that power resided in nature, that there were gods present in trees, in plants, in the soil.
It all starts with the nature of person. When you look at me, what is my nature? Western society will see me as flesh, blood, and bones. For us, yes, all those are there. But more importantly, there is spirit. We believe, Africa believes in the soul, in the spirit. And the two are married. When I die, death is not the end. It's but the beginning of longer life, eternity. That's what Africa believes. This is why you're going to find death ceremonies, rituals are quite complex. They are meant to guide the spirit, going wherever it is going, perhaps to some constellation. Stars were very important. It's a pity that Africa is losing a knowledge of astronomy. Our forefathers were studying the stars because you learned a lot. Even during the night. Stars will tell you how advanced the night was. So spiritualism has that basis. And then we had that ceremony, which we call bringing home ceremony, where you are inviting the departed spirit to come back, say, after a year, to look after its progeny. So when I die, as a spirit, I'll come back to look after my own children. This was fundamental to African spirituality.
And your grandchildren and so on and so
That's
forth.
right.
And that just lasts forever and ever.
Forever and ever.
And you'll watch over them, make sure they have enough to eat, that they are successful.
Good life, good health, right. All that. So for us, spirituality was functional.
So these spiritual people here, men and women, help people connect with their departed ones. Is that what it is? And also veneration of nature.
Yes, because for us, without nature, you really can't talk of spirituality. It's all interwoven, interacted, interrelated. It's all one thing.
These people are trying to reach a higher spiritual state, to experience their own vision of divine forces. They drink potions which they beat into a froth. Traditional medicine is an important part of ancient African practices. What is in there?
It's some herbs, but when you do the stirring, start frothing, you don't take the liquid, only the froth. And she's showing you how is consumed.
It's time, I think, for Patisa and I to take our leave of them all, to let them get on with their efforts to seek divine inspiration. Africa's indigenous religions are characterized by their openness. And though newer religions such as Islam and Christianity are prevalent today, that doesn't mean Africans have forgotten their ancestral spiritual ideas. These can often be incorporated into a person's Christian or Muslim beliefs. To get an idea of how this fusion works in practice, I travelled to West Africa, to Senegal. In a small, relatively isolated settlement in the north of the country, not far from St. Louis, in the village of Lumbul Dadi, is a Muslim man, Malik Sow, who's consulted from far and wide for his advice, wisdom, and traditional healing. His methods are based on the idea that animals and nature possess a spiritual essence. For example, he talks directly to trees so he can use their healing powers. Malik Sow, hello. Zainab.
Léegi da ngeen di seet ñaar fukki at ak léegi ñaata at la boobu ba léegi maa ngi si yëngu maa ngi def affaire kam-kam affaire faj affaire lépp luy yokkati nit ak affaire buy aar nit yëpp maa ngi si affaire cosaan pour faj bi dem ko fekk sumay maam ak sumay papa. waaw léegi dafa am benn kam-kam ne ñun dañuy jël ren suñu ñëwee si garab bi dana am baat lu ñu wax dana am lu ñu ko jox ñu jox ko pour ñu jubale ko si benn soxla su ko defee da nga ko jox dara nga am na looy wax nga dindi garab bi pour soo demee nga mën a ñëw fii defar ko fekk am nga baat looy wax dangay jat wax ak garab bi parce que garab booy wax ak moom dangay wax comme ñaa ngi wax ak nit nga jox li nga ko jox nga jël garab bi nga gàncax yi nga koos ko nga indi nga teg ko si ay lay xam nga lay mooy cosaan li ñuy ràbb noonu pour teg si ay soow léegi nag ba mu wow su woowee nag nga def ko sunguf bi nag su demee ba guddi nga génn nag am na looy jàpp am na looy wax si sa xam-xam pour garab bi mën a jub fi nga bëgg su ñëwee si nit ki mu def li mu fay defar li muy defar.
I noticed that Malik Sow is wearing a necklace which I know has extracts from the Quran embedded inside it. And I wonder how he reconciles his Muslim faith with his traditional beliefs.
Posé nga ma question bu neex tout le temps su fekkee ne liggéey nga liggéey suñu liggéey bi du sek question rek baaxul wala du l'islam am na noo koy defee mun nga ko liggéey di fekk yaa ngi méngoo ak l'islam ndax soo koy diddi comme li ma la wax rek nga jiital yàlla bi ba pare nga jàng dafa am lu muy tabake ak nit nag nit fu mu juddoo màggee fa su fa bayee mën na réer mais léegi comme li ma la wax ba léegi mun nga si dund si cosaan fekk dugaloo si li nga xam ne lu yàlla bëggul loolu moom nun danañu ko mën a séparer.
In Islam, a man may take 4 wives, and this is one practice that Malik Sow has accepted. I think this is the home of your first wife, and she's sitting here, so I'd like to ask her, if possible. Arga, what do you feel about being the first of 4 wives? Are you quite happy with your situation?
daal jafe bi si moom lépp benn lañ ñoo bokk lépp amul benn jafe-jafe waaw.
Malik Sow can afford to house his wives comfortably in their separate homes, as well as buy expensive consumer goods for the younger members of his family. Despite his spiritual superstar status in the community, the material world clearly holds some attractions. On the day I visit the family, a young man arrives seeking advice from Malik Sow. He wants to know if he should leave his village and, like many Senegalese, head for a new life in Europe. Malik Sow draws on the sand, seeking answers. He advises the young man not to embark on what he says would be a perilous journey. Malik Sow demonstrates how Africans can adhere to ancestral customs and spiritualism whilst at the same time maintaining their faith in Islam or Christianity. African experts today say that indigenous religions never debate whether there is one or several gods. Polytheism, they state, is a concept invented by those who describe themselves as monotheists and was never part of Africa's traditional discourse. Let's now look at the major religions described as monotheistic. Judaism predates both Christianity and Islam. The Jewish holy book, the Torah, dates back to about 600 BC. Jewish communities were established in Africa around the 5th century BC. Today, not many Jews remain on the continent, but Morocco still has a thriving Jewish community, albeit a small one of about 2,500. I've been invited to a lively restaurant in the capital, Rabat, by one leading Moroccan Jew, businessman Michel Ohana. Hello, Michel.
Hello.
Hello, very nice to see you. Michel Ohana tells me his views are typical of most Moroccan Jews.
Morocco is a mixed up of everything, you know, and even being Jew in a Moroccan way is totally tuned into Moroccan historical and music and everything, because even in the synagogue, everything is done the Moroccan way.
So Judaism has become indigenized in Morocco?
Endemically, totally, you know. It's part of the culture, is something you cannot wash up. Even if you leave your country, you know, you still have in your heart this, not souvenir, but this part of tradition who is part of you.
So do you speak Hebrew at home with your family, for instance?
No, I speak Arabic. That's my first language. I learned to speak French and English in school, but at home, we used to speak Arabic.
So you describe yourself as an Arab Jew, a Moroccan Jew.
Maybe the other Jew gonna point me as an Arabic Jew. Yeah, I'm totally comfortable with that.
History professor Mohammed Kambib is based in the Moroccan capital, Rabat, and he tells me why Jews first went to North Africa.
They came from Palestine along the northern Sahara, the northern desert, and they started settling in parts of southern Morocco. The first waves started flooding towards Morocco immediately after the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians. And later on, in the 1st century AD, after the destruction of the second temple by the Romans.
So how did Judaism actually take hold with part of the Berber population?
There was a sort of interpenetration between the two, between the new comers, the Jews, and the natives, let's say the Berbers. And we had a process known as the Berberization of the Jews and the Judaization of the Berbers, who were pagans, by the way. And that was it.
Serge Badugo is president of the Moroccan Jewish community, and he lives in Casablanca. He explains how traditional Berber beliefs blended with Judaism.
You know that here in Morocco we have 630 holy places, and some holy places are venerated by Muslims and Jews. And this is the mark of the links, common inherited with Berbers and Jews all over the time.
Is there anything about the practice of Judaism in Morocco that has got Berber characteristics?
Yes, one thing that is the most important is the cult of the saints, the holy men. That is directly a tradition, Berber tradition.
מלכות כל העולמים, ומשריך בכל דור ודור, סומך אדוני לכל הנופלים, ותוקף לכל הכיפופים, הנה כל אליך יסברו, ואתה נותן את אוכלם בעתו, פותח את ידיך, ומשביע לכל חיי רצון.
This synagogue in the Jewish quarter of Marrakesh is fully functioning and is open to Jews and non-Jews alike.
Hallelujah. Ils sont nés ici à Marrakech, toute ma famille, plusieurs générations qui sont là. Mais là, ils sont partis dans les années 57. Ils sont partis en Israël. Ils sont nés ici. La génération, je ne sais pas quelle génération, mais ils sont nés ici à Marrakech.
The authorities in Morocco celebrate the country's Jewish community. The Jewish Museum in Casablanca is the only such museum in the whole of the Arab world. Its exhibits include ancient Moroccan Jewish traditional costumes, jewelry, religious objects, texts, and photos. Its curator is Zuhur Rahihil. Now I have to ask you how you feel about being a Muslim curator of a Jewish museum.
Personally, for me, it's not a strange thing. It is a normal thing because, for example, when you visit to the Met Museum and you have an Islamic department, maybe the curator.
You're talking about the Metropolitan Museum in New York.
Yeah, Metropolitan Museum. So it is the same thing. That means you walk about culture, you forget your religious identity. You should do it without discrimination. Morocco has a plural cultural identity. We have not only Arab and Islamic part. That means we are Amazigh or Berber, and we have this African heritage, and we should preserve it. We have this Mediterranean, and we should preserve it. We have Arabic, Islamic thing, we should preserve it.
How far do you think visitors to this museum embrace this notion that Judaism here in Morocco is part of their own identity, even if they are Muslim?
In the beginning, we have some people who they make confusion between Jewish museum and Israeli museum. Everything that we exhibit here, and this museum is Moroccan. We don't talk about Israeli because the Jews, they were here in Morocco before the creation of the Israeli state.
Another Jewish community are the Beit Israel Jews, who lived in the kingdom of Aksum 2,000 years ago in what is today Ethiopia and Eritrea. They claim descent from Menelik I, supposedly the son of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. Whatever their provenance, after much examination by modern Jewish religious scholars, they were accepted as an ancient Jewish community and were relocated en masse to Israel in the 1980s. Egypt also had an ancient Jewish community. If you go on a special excursion to one of the tourist attractions in Cairo, illustrating life in ancient Egypt, you'll see a reenactment of the biblical scene of Moses being found in the bulrushes.
Moses is a prophet who is revered by Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. Of course, the story of Moses has it that his mother hid him in the reeds in a marsh in Egypt to save his life. He was then found by a member of the Pharaoh's family, and he was taken to the royal palace where he was brought up. Later, Moses left the comforts of royal life and returned to his people, the Israelites.
The story of Moses, who was born in Egypt, leading the Israelites out of the country across the Red Sea to Mount Sinai, where he received the 10 Commandments, is of course related in the Holy Books. Later in history, many Jews crossed the Mediterranean Sea from Western Asia, what we now call the Middle East, and settled in Alexandria on the north coast of Egypt around 300 years BC. Until the 20th century, the Jews of Alexandria were one of the most flourishing and influential Jewish communities in Africa. Alexandria, the city established by Alexander the Great, was also where the first Christians arrived in Africa in the middle of the 1st century AD. Alexandria became an important city in the ancient world. It was a center of learning, and hence much of the thinking developed here had a great influence on early Christianity. In order to understand why, we must first go back a little further into history.
Alexander the Great established an empire which stretched from India to Italy, but it was here in Africa where he chose a small fishing village in Egypt on the Mediterranean coast to build a new capital, Alexandria. Today, there's a statue of Alexander on horseback in the city that still bears his name.
Alexandria soon became famous and prosperous throughout the ancient world under Alexander the Great. Upon his death in 323 BC, he was succeeded by one of his generals, Ptolemy. And it was the Ptolemaic dynasty that built the Great Library of Alexandria that sadly burnt down in antiquity.
The present-day library in Alexandria is very modern. With its glass and steel geometric design, there are computers everywhere in light and airy open workspaces. During the Ptolemy era, some of the greatest thinkers of the time, like Archimedes, came to the old library to work on their theories and learn from others. This gave Alexandria a unique status in the history of ideas, literature, philosophy, and science.
Therefore, it's no surprise that Alexandria later became so central to early Christian development and that Egypt's Christian church was so influential. Christianity in Egypt adopted the local Coptic language so that the humblest who couldn't speak Greek could be included in services. and that is why the Christian church in Egypt is still known as the Coptic Church. By the early 21st century, Christians constituted about 10% of Egypt's population. The Church of St. Mary in Zaytun in Cairo is one of the busiest in Egypt today, and Father Basilios Subhi is its popular priest.
حقيقة احنا بنعتبر مصر من البلاد المحظوظة لأنها يمكن البلد الوحيد خارج أرض فلسطين اللي جه زارها السيد المسيح طفلاً مع والدته العذراء وخطيبها يوسف النجار. فبالتالي بنعتبر بداية المسيحية كانت مع بداية مجيء المسيح إلى أرض مصر. فمصر من أولى البلاد اللي عرفت المسيحية طريقها إليها في القرن الأول الميلادي. أخيراً كانت زيارة الرسول مرقس الإنجيلي إلى مصر للبشارة، وبالتأكيد مع هذه الزيارة كان التأسيس للكنيسة الفعلي، ومن وقتها والمسيحية منتظمة ومتصلة في مصر حتى الآن.
You use the Coptic language in your church service, and that really is the final stage, isn't it, of the language of the pharaohs, ancient Egyptian language.
Yes. ونحن نفضل أن نستخدمها كنوع من أنواع الحفاظ على التاريخ والهوية والثقافة. هي لم تعد لغة حياة مستخدمة، لكن نحن نعرف نستخدمها ككلمات تحية مثلا. أشبه بكريتي، how are you?
أشبه كريتي.
أشبه بكريتي.
أشبه بكريتي.
أشبه بكريتي.
How are you?
How are you?
This is a crash course in Coptic language. This church of yours in 1968 to 1970, for 2 years, every day, you all believed that the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus Christ, appeared here.
Yes.
And can I put to you this idea that she is very venerated by the Coptic Christians because she kind of continued the tradition of the worship of Isis in the ancient Egyptian beliefs.
للقديسة العذراء مريم مكانة غير عادية عند المصريين بصفة عامة، ليس المسيحيين فقط ولكن حتى عند إخواتنا من المسلمين. عشان كده لما جات وظهرت هنا في كنيستنا في الزيتون من سنة 68 لسنة 70، كانت الأعداد الغفيرة من المصريين والأجانب من المسيحيين والمسلمين أكبر دليل وأكبر شاهد على محبة كل هذه الشعوب للسيدة العذراء.
The Virgin Mary is not only revered in Christianity, there is in fact a whole surah or chapter about her in the Quran. In Egypt's neighbor to the south, what is modern-day Sudan, Christianity also spread in the early 1st century. The northern part of Sudan was occupied by a people called the Nobatai, who may have come from further west in Africa in the late 6th century BC. The Greek thinker Eratosthenes is believed to have been the first person to refer to the region as Nubia in the 3rd century BC. Nubia was divided into 3 kingdoms: Nabatea with its capital at Pharas, Makuria, centered on Old Dongola, and Alwa, stretching east with its capital at Sorba on the Blue Nile. Makuria was the most impressive of the Nubian kingdoms. It absorbed Nabatea, and its king adopted Christianity and accepted the authority of the Coptic Church in Alexandria. Dr. Abdurrahman Ali, director of Sudan's National Museum, tells me you can see the Coptic influence on Nubian Christianity in the paintings and frescoes on display.
The paintings, especially the mural paintings from the Cathedral of Pharas, we have them here in the Sudan National Museum. They were used by Nubian architects or Nubian artists. And this is their interpretation, and they drive these ideas from the Christian beliefs and customs. Actually, any concept brought from abroad, it was used to be localized here in Sudan to produce their own beliefs and customs.
Are there any residual Christian practices that you see even today in Muslim Sudan?
There are some customs and beliefs related to Christianity still continue up to the Islamic period used by the local people of Sudan, like taking the bride and the groom to the river.
And water on the forehead of a newborn child.
Yes, and the water, yeah.
Which is a bit like a baptism.
Yeah, the baptism, yes. So it is a baptism not in an Islamic fashion, an Islamic way. So the some people, they do it, but they don't know from where it originates.
Is there any kind of embarrassment about the pre-Islamic past here?
No, there is no any embarrassment because they consider it a part of our customs and local beliefs.
The arrival of Christianity in Nubia meant ties further north with the Mediterranean deepened. This encouraged trade and the flow of ideas and art. We know little of the Christian kings in this part of Sudan's history. Their tombs have yet to be discovered, and the searing heat has discouraged extensive archaeological work. But Nubian culture is still preserved to some extent in both northern Sudan and here in southern Egypt. This is a typical traditional Nubian house in Aswan in southern or upper Egypt. The family inside give me a much welcome cup of tea and offer me some shade. It's a hot day.
Thank you. أهلا وسهلا. السلام عليكم. أنا اسمي زينب.
My local guide, Fatima Sobhi, has studied ancient history.
It's a Nubian and culture here. We have, especially the design of the house, completely a traditional Nubian thing. So usually Nubian house like this consists of an open yard and rooms around it. This is a place when they come, they welcome the guest. As we sit here on these benches, it's called mastaba. It's a very famous thing. And we have these mats could be from cotton like this. We put it on the mastaba and people can sit.
It's called birish.
A birish, yes, that's right.
So in northern Sudan, it's the same thing, the mastaba and the birish.
Yes. And the very famous thing in the Nubian house is to use every part of date palm tree. Around us, everything from the date palm tree. We used to have millions of date palm trees. And we use the leaves, like here, to cover the ceiling, to make these plates which hang it from the roof. We also have it to make Nubian plates to decorate our houses.
And what about the mode of dress?
Usually, as a Nubian, our dress, traditional one, is called jirjar. This is a black, transparent dress. Under it, we wear a colorful galabeya. Men, if they go to the village or to the mosque, they wear the white kaftan or galabeya.
I leave the family in Aswan with the ladies of the house chatting away in their Nubian dialect. As well as Nubian Christians in Egypt and Sudan, Christianity also arrived relatively early in what is today Ethiopia and Eritrea. The patriarch of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is His Holiness Abuna Matthias, and he's reading from a Bible written in the ancient Ethiopian script, Gez. He rarely gives interviews, but he's granted me an audience.
The Ethiopian Orthodox Church is one of the ancient churches in the world. And it started during the 1st century. But the official declaration of Christianity in the 4th century. We appointed bishops and priests and deacons. So we got appointing bishops from Egypt. The bishop expanded the religious teachings, baptizing the people, just like sister churches. Where sister churches, they were appointed bishops to Ethiopia before, about 50 to 60 years ago. But now we are independent. We have a good relationship with the Coptic Orthodox churches.
Famous in the history of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church are the 9 saints who'd made their way to the Kingdom of Aksum from what is today the Middle East. And many of the practices you see in the Orthodox Church of Ethiopia today, like this ceremony at the Holy Trinity Cathedral in the capital Addis Ababa, go back to this earliest period of Christianity.
The Ethiopian people, Ethiopian Christians, are very strong religious. So they worship God very deeply. So that's why they are laying on the floor and pray to God, and that's the sign of strong belief.
The tradition of monasticism is very important to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, as it is to the Coptic Church in Egypt. In fact, Father Basilios Subhi tells me that the tradition of monasticism was begun in Egypt by St. Anthony, one of the so-called Desert Fathers.
قد لا نغالي لما نقول إن مصر هي اللي صدرت الرهبنة للعالم، لأن مؤسس الرهبنة المسيحية هو القديس الأنبا أنطونيوس اللي كان عايش في الصحاري والبراري المصرية في القرن الثالث الميلادي. الأمر اللي جعل حتى الرهبان الأجانب ييجوا يتعلموا من هنا من الرهبان في مصر كيف تكون الحياة الرهبانية، وخدوا من هنا القوانين والترتيبات وهم نقلوها لبلادهم.
As well as St. Anthony, another African is one of Christianity's most significant thinkers, St. Augustine of Hippo, in what is modern-day Annaba in northeastern Algeria. St. Augustine, for example, developed doctrines of predestination, the divine foreordaining of all that will ever happen. He helped formulate the theory of the just war and the concept of original sin, the guilt of Adam, which Christians believe all humans inherit. St. Augustine was a North African whose mother was Christian and father was pagan. He was born in eastern Algeria in 354. He was made a saint at the beginning of the 14th century and is highly revered by both Roman Catholics and Protestants. Although St. Augustine is one of the most important figures in Christianity, it has to be said that he didn't always lead the life of a saint. Before he joined the priesthood, he had a long-time lover whom he never married and with whom he had an illegitimate son. It was after this son died as an adolescent that St. Augustine became a member of the clergy here in Hippo. Father Ambrose is from the Democratic Republic of Congo and is the priest in charge of the church at St. Augustine in Annaba.
Augustin, c'est quelqu'un qui cherchait à être un grand homme dans sa vie. Et même les études qu'il a faites, c'était pour atteindre ce but. Ça veut dire, il cherchait en réalité le siège du gouverneur d'une des provinces de l'Empire romain. Et il était sur le point d'avoir ça. Et tout d'un coup, tout change dans sa vie. Il accepte, il décide de devenir pas seulement chrétien, mais chrétien et moine. Parce que c'était toute la question qui se posait à lui pendant toute la période où il a commencé cette recherche de Dieu. Depuis sa 19e année jusqu'à la 32e année, il a mis beaucoup de temps pour arriver à ce qu'il cherchait.
You do not think it is controversial that he had, in effect, a concubine for many, many years and had a son who died as a youth?
Augustin tenait à cette femme. Il l'aimait beaucoup. Et lui-même, il dit qu'il lui est resté fidèle pendant 15 ans. Alors, une telle femme, je ne peux pas l'appeler concubine. Et surtout qu'il ne voulait pas l'abandonner.
But they did not marry.
Ils n'étaient pas mariés, mais moi je suis sûr que si Augustin continuait avec elle, il se serait marié. Mais il fallait satisfaire le désir de sa mère de le voir marié avec une femme du même rang social que lui. Augustin a eu beaucoup de respect vis-à-vis de cette femme, si bien qu'il a refusé de la nommer. On ne connaît pas le nom de cette femme jusqu'à aujourd'hui. Alors, sur base de quoi on va lui donner un rang qu'Augustin ne lui a pas donné?
This is the part of the church where St. Augustine would have performed his baptisms. Of course, his church was in the Christian quarter, but it was in the old Roman town established way back in the middle of the 2nd century BC by King Gaia. So it wasn't originally a church, this building, but it was used as a church by St. Augustine.
Then, in the 5th century, the Vandals, a collection of tribes from northern Europe under their king Gaiseric, took control of key Roman sites in North Africa, including Hippo. They laid siege to the town for 18 months. The citizens of Hippo, including St. Augustine, held out.
These are the ruins of the old Christian quarter of Hippo. It is where St. Augustine lived and prayed as Bishop of Hippo, and it is also where he died during the siege of the city by the Vandals in 430 AD. St. Augustine by then was in his mid-70s. He was taken to Italy for burial, but in the 19th century, part of his remains were returned and buried in the church that bears his name.
À la base de la construction de la basilique, il y avait l'idée de pouvoir rapatrier tout son corps et l'abriter ici. Ça n'a pas été possible. Alors, on a obtenu le cubitus que vous voyez là. Augustin étant africain, et je crois que les Africains devraient beaucoup faire pour se reconnaître aussi en lui, dans plusieurs choses. Hein. Rien que dans la manière d'étudier, la manière de rechercher quelque chose qui leur tient à cœur. Hein. Et je dirais même dans la recherche de la paix.
St. Augustine is the most celebrated of the early Christians of Africa. This statue of him depicts him with a burning heart, pierced by an arrow in his hand, and the eagle by his side is the symbol of St. John the Evangelist. As you travel through North Africa, you can see that most of the archaeological remains from the 3rd and 4th century were built during Roman rule. And here and there you can see evidence of that early Christian presence. For instance, in the historic town of Sechel on the coast of Algeria.
This mosaic here at the museum in Sechel, or Caesarea as it was known in times gone by, it's known as the Peacock Mosaic. And how do we know it's from the Christian era? Well, if you look at the two peacocks, in front of them are these two yellow symbols, and they are in the shape of the cross.
The indigenous Berber inhabitants of North Africa, who had followed their traditional religions, seemed to accept Judaism and Christianity willingly. Many of them embraced these new religions, and by the end of the Roman period of rule in North Africa in the 7th century AD, they were all living together peacefully. Then there came a new religion, Islam, which was to overshadow all others in this part of Africa and which still dominates today. In the next programme, we look at the spread of Islam in Africa and how it was practiced on the continent. We also chart the rise of the powerful Muslim dynasties of North Africa that built cities and established empires that extended across Africa and into Europe.